Welcome, everyone. My name is Leila Logiziko. I am the Democratic District Leader representing Chelsea, Assembly District 75, Part A. And I want to thank you all for joining. As I said, we're well over 100 participants to this event. This is a really important webinar on the proposed demolition and redevelopment of the Fulton and Elliott-Chelsea houses. Public housing administered currently by NYCHA and located in our district. Tonight, our goal is simple. It is to provide clear, factual information about the project and what's actually contained in the draft environmental impact statement, the DEIS. To help walk us through the details, we're very fortunate to be joined by George Janes, a respected urban planner who has reviewed the DEIS and will present his analysis. We're also joined by George Janes' colleague, Alihan Poat, who is also an urban designer and will help us understand what this project entails. But before we begin, I want to take a moment to acknowledge public housing tenant organizers, Renee Kitt, president of Elliott-Chelsea Tenants Association, Salinas Miranda, also of Elliott-Chelsea, Jackie Lara, tenant leader of Fulton Houses. I want to thank all of you who helped organize this evening: Len, Lizette, Carol, Lydia, Anthony, Tom, Tito, Joanne, David, Luana, Bert, Inga, Pam, John, and so many more. This is a true community effort. A few words about how this meeting is going to run. After George's presentation, we will open the floor to questions. Please note, this is a Q&A question. We kindly ask that you stick to questions. We will not take comments during the session. We will limit the length of the questions to 30 seconds, and we really will enforce. We have, as I said, lots of participants on this call, and we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to speak. This event will end approximately around 8 p.m. If we're not able to get through to all the questions, you will have an opportunity to send us a note, and we will make sure that we'll respond in writing. It is possible that we will not have the answer to your question tonight. If that is the case, we will note it duly, and we will look for the answer. I want to mention that we have invited NYCHA to come and present at various opportunities, including in front of the Chelsea Reform Democratic Club, and NYCHA has declined. We learned last night that NYCHA was also invited by Community Board 4, and they also declined to appear. I want to mention that you will have an opportunity to actually share your comments publicly at an upcoming public hearing. It is scheduled for tomorrow, Wednesday, at 6 p.m. at the Fulton Community Center, located at 119 9th Avenue. There will be another session on Thursday at 6:30 p.m. at Hudson Guild, located at 441 West 26th Street. These are NYCHA's official public hearings regarding this draft environmental impact statement. Your voice matters. It is really important that you show up to these events and that you speak up. I also want to emphasize that this project is not a done deal. We are actually at the fairly beginning of a process that may or may not proceed. So I just want to make that very, very clear. So with all of that being said, I want to welcome George. Thank you so much. And the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Boy, I'm really glad to be here. I'm going to share my screen, if that's all right.
Great.
All right, good. Okay, so today's agenda is actually pretty simple. We're going to just really spend a lot of our time talking about the development proposal and getting into a 3D model of it, talking about what the rezoning proposal is, and then we're going to get into the numbers. And then we're going to get into environmental impacts. Now, I just want to start by saying a little bit about DEIS and environmental impacts and why it's done. So whenever government makes a land use decision that is discretionary, that they don't have to do, they have to study the environmental impacts of that decision and disclose those environmental impacts to the public before that decision is made, and then mitigate those impacts to the extent practicable. It's a disclosure document. It's essentially showing that this decision that they're considering, and it hasn't been made yet, they're considering it, um, has been well considered, and that the public and decision makers has been informed of the environmental impacts ahead of time. And that's what the DEIS is. It's a draft environmental impact statement that's there for your comment. And the hearing that is tomorrow is, hearings are important. And if you have something to say about it, you should either you consider going or submitting written comments. So the proposal, as it's described in the DEIS, and before I actually go on, I just want to say something, say about my associate Alihan Palat, who is here. He has done the yeoman work modeling these and really getting into the DEIS. He is here to either answer questions. He also has a real-time model. And so you're going to be seeing some images, and that, in the question and answer, if you want to see it from a different direction or something like that, that's something that we are able to do in the next session. Okay, so most of the proposals demolish the existing Fulton and Elliott-Chelsea NYCHA estates and redevelop them with the new housing. There are these 6 alternatives that are studied in the EIS. You have the no action alternative, which is something you always have, the rezoning alternative, the non-rezoning alternative, the mid-block bulk alternative, which is also a rezoning alternative, rehabilitation and infill alternative, and then the no significant impacts alternative. The first and the 6th one are really just for the environmental review purposes. And the 5th one, the applicant says, is a infeasible alternative. The 3 that are feasible are the rezoning alternative, the non-rezoning alternative, and the mid-block alternative. But before we get into going and exploring all of those, a little bit about what rezoning means. So both of the sites are currently zoned mostly R8. An R8 district produces a building that generically looks like the image you see on the right side of your screen. Basically, the zoning encourages buildings surrounded by open space. If there's less open space, the buildings need to be smaller. Generally, if there's more open space, the buildings can be taller. This is a kind of zoning district that was very popular in the mid-20th century. It's becoming less and less popular as time has gone on and the city has moved away from it. The existing buildings, the estates, are underbuilt according to even their current zoning, which means that the current zoning would allow them to be about twice as big as they are now. The proposals don't name a new zoning district. That they just say it's going to be different. And it is described. It says that the maximum floor area ratio in the mid-block would increase to 8. What does that mean? It means that for every square foot of lot area, you could do 8 square feet of building area. And then for the areas closer to the avenues, the maximum FAR would increase to 12, which would essentially allow for much bigger buildings in both of the campuses. Also, part of rezoning would be something called mandatory inclusionary housing, which would mean that between 20 and 30% of the housing units that are developed would have to be income restricted. And they have the map showing where the estates are versus the rezoning area. And they're mostly coterminous, but the rezoning area goes a little bit outside the estates. And also by rezoning means a large-scale general development special permit is going to be needed. What is that? If you have a big site, you can go get a special permit from the City Planning Commission. It allows the waiving of certain zoning rules. So you're going to change the zoning districts, but also get special permits to change some other zoning rules. And essentially they are distribution of the floor area without regard to the district boundaries. So that means the high density on the avenue could be moved to the mid block. The location of buildings without regard for yard, court, and distance between building rules. Right now, the buildings have to have certain minimum spacing between them, and the yards and courts need to be of certain size. And those rules can be waived by this special permit. You can also waive the height and setback regulations as well. It gives a lot of flexibility for projects. And, you know, like, for instance, at nearly 30 feet, like this is building one of the Fulton. And it has in the rear yard a building that's 30 feet tall, which it's going to need a waiver for. You can't do that as of right. All of the rezonings will have to follow the city's uniform land use review procedure. And that is a process that takes about 7.5 months once it starts, and it hasn't started. So everything that we're talking about is, you know, this is before that process for rezoning. That process involves the community board, the borough president, the city planning commission, city council. And while they're all important, and the public, you know, in the hearing of that process, and while they're all important, your council member plays the most important role in that process. Okay, so now we're going to go through each of the scenarios using massing models. But before we do that, I want to just talk about the conventions that we use. What you see on the left is what's called an architectural massing model. The colors have meaning. The gray color is our building mechanicals and bulkheads. The yellow color is proposed as a residential use. The blue color is proposed as a community facility use, and the red color is proposed as commercial uses. Most of this it's primarily residential development, and so you'll see mostly yellow in it. The lines on the massing models show stories, and they reflect the plans as shown in the DEIS, which sometimes produce odd conditions. So, for instance, right here on the left-hand side is the plan for Building 5 in Elliott-Chelsea houses. And outlined in red here is this portion of the building that is proposed to be 62 feet tall and 10 stories. A 62-foot tall building that's 10 stories means that each floor is just a little over 6 feet tall, which is not possible, right? That is an error. But we're still showing it as 10 feet here, or 10 stories here, because that's what it says. In other cases, if there's inconsistencies between drawings, we fix the obvious error. We pick the one that makes a building that makes sense. You know, this is a draft environmental impact statement. This is not a final environmental impact statement. It's complicated, and there will be errors, and there are errors in it. And what we do is we try to identify those errors as best we can, and they get fixed in the final. But you know, Alihan had to deal with a number of these as we went through them. Okay, so we're going to start with Fulton. This is the existing conditions at Fulton houses. It is a classical tower in the park housing development campus, right, where you have lots of open space surrounding buildings. What's a little unusual about this campus is that the 9th Avenue frontage has relatively low buildings, and the larger buildings are in the middle of the campus on the mid blocks. Typically in New York, you have a different pattern where the larger buildings are on the avenues, but that's not the case here. But also that's the nature of this area where you have Ninth Avenue is still is relatively low. The tallest building on the avenues is 62 feet, but the taller buildings in the mid-block get up to 232 feet. The rezoning alternative, or what is called the rezoning alternative, increases the number of dwelling units on the site from 944 to 2,732. The base height that you'll see, which is the building that comes up at the street line, goes up to about 120, 130 feet on all of the buildings. And this is now the style that is encouraged, where it is thought that an open campus like what we have now, where you have gaps in the street wall, is not considered good urban design for today. And the city tries to encourage buildings that come to the street or near the street and create what's called a street wall, a consistent street wall at or near the street line. The development is substantially sized. It's about 2.5 times the size of the development that's currently there. And also you would have a commercial uses that line much of the frontage along 9th Avenue. The non-zoning alternative, which is an alternative that says, all right, well, we're not going to go and get a rezoning. What can we do under the current R8 zoning? And so they're calling it as a non-zoning alternative. This is called as of right development. Now, Alihan and I didn't check this to make certain it was as of right development, because that would be a complicated effort. We're trusting them that it is in fact as of right development, but it's smaller. If you do not rezone, you can approximately double the size of development on the campus. Goes from a little under 1,000 to a little under 2,000 units. And you would have a development like this. The mid-block alternative would have something along these lines, which moves a lot of the bulk from the avenue to the mid-block. And we're going to go back to this. This is the rezoning alternative, which has the development along a lot of the density along 9th Avenue versus here, which brings in some of the density into the mid-block, lowering the development along 9th Avenue to about 250 feet. And then rehabilitation and infill. This is a proposal that the applicant has said is not feasible. There are only 2 small additions to the Fulton Houses campus. It's these small buildings along the 9th Avenue frontage, which would be, essentially small commercial buildings. And, this is not studied in the EIS very much because they say it is not a feasible development. Now, the EIS also has something called photo simulations or photo renderings, where you take an existing conditions photograph. Layla has shown some of these in some of her work. And we are just repeating them here, where you have you have the rezoning alternative and the mid-block alternative, where you could see the change in building height. And, this is another one where we point out, like, the draft condition of this is like you have a building shown right here, which is 99 feet tall and 8 stories. And then 3 stories above, it says 105 feet, 12 stories. That would mean that these 3 stories are about 6 feet tall, which is, they're not. And that's, it's again, the draft nature of these. I think the massing is right and the annotation is wrong. there's another view looking north on 9th Avenue where you have the rezoning alternative compared to the mid-block alternative. Sorry. Again, we'll do that. Okay, and so one of the things we also did on this was just looking at by the numbers. There's a table which shows both the Fulton but it shows the entire development together. But what we did is we tried to break it up so that we have Fulton separate from Chelsea Elliott and Elliott-Chelsea, sorry. And so you could see how they compare by themselves. And, you know, we have, as I said, you have about 1,000 units under the no action, going up to about 2,700 under the rezoning scenarios, with just under 2,000 with the no rezonings. And, you know, well, it needs to be said that you're taking 100% NYCHA units and adding in market rate units at a percentage of about half with the rezonings and about a third with the no rezoning. And then there's scattered amounts of community facility space and commercial space. All right, so Elliott-Chelsea. This is the campus, which has about 1,112 dwelling units. You know, we have some inconsistencies where, you know, we went and we pulled the certificate of occupancies to see the building heights and measured them according to the LiDAR model. The application says that the tallest building here is 223 feet. Not according to its certificate of occupancy. We're showing it at 183 feet at the tallest, but there are various heights of the other buildings. The rezoning alternative for Elliott-Chelsea has 2,778 dwelling units compared to the 1,100 that are currently there right now, with buildings that go up to 428 feet. But there are substantial buildings that have a very strong street wall, right? Remember when I was saying how, you know, these types of tower in the park style developments are, they were very popular in the mid 20th century. They're becoming much less popular now. New developments are encouraged by the city to have this consistent street wall, like a podium or a base, and then towers that rise up over it. And that is exactly what is being proposed here. What this does is it eliminates a lot of the open space that you see on these campuses and replaces it with this consistent street wall and active ground floor uses. The non-zoning alternative for Elliott-Chelsea it would be this. The building that is the tallest building right here actually doesn't change. Everything else does change though. And the way this zoning works is that the height of the building is limited by something called a sky exposure plane. Since 27th Street is not a map street, there is no nearby street for a sky exposure plane, so it can be very tall. Otherwise, it has to be smaller and shorter. You end up with about 1,000 fewer dwelling units, and you don't have the commercial uses that you would have in a rezoning scenario, because this is an R8 district with no commercial overlay, and commercial uses are not permitted without a rezoning. The mid-block bulk alternative is actually exactly the same as the rezoning alternative. There are no differences. And this is the one in the rehabilitation and infill alternative that includes a new building right here in the darker yellow. Could be placed. It has 110 units associated with it, half of which would be considered affordable and other half market rate. But that is where that's that is the only infill that they could figure. And part of the issue here in terms of the rehabilitation and infill alternative is that the way these buildings are sited on the campus, there aren't a lot of good places for infill. And that is why they've don't have a lot of options when it comes to infill on these campuses. They have one of the simulations. This is 10th Avenue looking south, and this is both of the rezoning scenarios. I'm going to do that again. They use this sort of ghosted massing where you could actually see the existing buildings through. Generally speaking, I don't think that's good practice because buildings are solid, but it's helpful in showing the just simply the scale difference of the buildings that are being added. And again, you have an increase in the number of units by about 2.5 times, the development by about 2.5 times. And you go from 100% NYCHA to mixed income with both income restricted units for mandatory inclusionary housing and NYCHA either section 8 units would be how they'd be changed. We have some overall views of the campuses in existing conditions, showing context, the rezoning alternative, the non-rezoning alternative, and then the mid-block bulk alternative with the rehabilitation alternative. One of the good things about this is that we have a model which we can edit. We can see it in any direction we want. And so if this can be made available to folks who are looking to explore options. Okay, so this is the total development program as described in the EIS, where you have the 2,000 or so units going to 5,500 units as in total in the rezoning alternatives, and with the non-rezoning alternative, less than 4,000 units, and the amount of development that comes along with it. Now, most of the environmental impacts come from people who would be living, new people who would be living and working in this area, mostly by people who are living. I'm going to go into the DEIS significant impacts. I would actually take questions now, but you want me to hold questions to the end. Is that right, Layla?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
We'll take.
All right. Okay. So the DEIS, as I said earlier, it's a disclosure document that discloses significant adverse impacts. And it says that there will be significant adverse impacts in the following topic areas. We'll go over them. So there are going to be significant shadow impacts, and really the big significant shadow impacts are on Chelsea Park and on PS 33's playground. And I just picked a couple of the images that are showing the incremental shadow impact for one day, one of the periods, and it's substantial. And and it makes perfect sense when you're going to have very tall buildings directly to the south of a open space resource like this. You will get substantial shadow impacts, and this is mostly in the midday or in the afternoon in both of these, and they're unmitigatable shadow impacts. They will, where both of these get substantial amount of sun, they will have significant shadow impacts really through the course of the year. There will be non-significant shadow impacts on the High Line. And it's interesting because even though the High Line is shadowed actually for the majority of most mornings, you will have some sort of shadow impact. Due to the nature of the high line and the kind of plants that are on it, it's not considered significant, at least according to the standards of environmental review. But there will be shadow on most parts of the high line in the mornings and most days. In terms of the other resources, historic architectural resources, Elliott-Chelsea houses is itself a historic architectural resource. And so demolishing it would mean a significant impact on historic resources. And the DEIS, it discloses that, and then to mitigate the impact, it commits to a number of different mitigation measures, probably the most significant of which is the design and installation in a publicly accessible location of an interpretive display that adequately presents the history and significance of Elliott-Chelsea houses. And then, it has some other, you have to do a building survey, and then you have to have construction and construction protection plans for the surrounding historic properties. So it's not nothing, but, the buildings would be gone according to this plan, and so therefore this is their mitigation. Transportation will also have significant impacts, both for traffic and pedestrians, and most of the significant impacts can be mitigated through engineering design changes, and it goes through. It discloses what the impacts are, what some of the suggestions are, but mitigation for traffic, if it's implemented, it will be at the option of DOT. So what the DEIS says is that, yes, there will be significant impacts. These are the mitigation measures. If they are implemented, though, ultimately that is at the option of DOT when it's needed. Transportation tables are hard to read, but if you're interested in it, you actually can understand it. And I'm going to go through it briefly in case there are some folks that really want to get into details. And because there's this shorthand, and the shorthand is called level of service, or LOS. And essentially it goes from A to F, like a grade. The level A is free-flowing traffic, down to level F, which is stop and go, forced flow traffic, traffic that is, above capacity. And so you have these tables all throughout. The section is actually quite long, but if you are really interested in it, really the column that you want to pay attention to is the thing that says LOS, right? And what it says is that the level of service in the no action scenario is saying in the afternoon is saying there already is a lot of bad traffic in the area right now. And so you have level of service of F on 23rd Street and 10th Avenue, where you have volumes over capacity already in your PM peak hour. And what the rezoning is going to do, or what the rezoning alternative would do, would make it worse, and would make it significantly worse. And then, with mitigation, you can modify some of that and make it a little better, but and lessen the significant impacts. But I guess the point of this is this: if I were a resident of this area, the traffic is bad. It's projected to get worse, and it's not better, which would make sense if by adding all of these residents. Now you have the same level of service measure both in pedestrians and transit. This is specifically looking at traffic, and there are no significant impacts disclosed on the transit system, but there will be some for pedestrians and traffic. Then finally, you have these significant impacts on construction, right? a big one is related to noise, noise and traffic. And what they have here in the EIS is it says that these facades of these buildings that are outlined in blue during construction will have significant impacts from noise. And the noise impacts are largely unmitigatable, but the EIS does commit to a number of mitigation measures that they've put into this. And this is actually enforceable. And so the developer would need to actually follow these rules, which is essentially, I just pasted them down here, but it's going above and beyond the minimum standards required to mitigate noise according to code. And so instead of using compressors that generate a lot of noise, you're going to try to actually hook into the grid so that you don't have to run a generator that makes noise. You just get your power from the grid. And so there are a number of things that they can do in terms of sound blankets and noise barriers that are taller than code. And these are enforceable, meaning the developer actually has to do this according to the commitments that are laid out in the EIS. The construction impacts, they're temporary, but the timeline for construction is long. All right, so it says in the schedule that the construction would start in 2025, which is not possible because we have 7.5 months of ULURP that would have to happen in this year for that to happen. It couldn't start that soon, but that's what it says, and extend to 2041 or 16 years of construction, which is a very long construction timeline. So it's hard to say, yeah, construction impacts are temporary, but they will be taking a very long time. And then, finally, for each of the feasible scenarios that are outlined, they produce a substantial amount of housing. And this is really above and beyond my area. Like, I wasn't asked to look at this, but this is something that just came on my radar screen because, a few days ago, this news hit my inbox, and the Trump administration eyes deep cut to Section 8 housing vouchers. And a big part of this whole proposal is NYCHA units covered by Section 9 would be transferred to Section 8. And, it seems to me that understanding changes to the federal approach to actually both Sections 8 and 9 is absolutely fundamental and critical to evaluating these options, right? Is the Section 9, is Section 8 feasible going forward, and what's going to be happening? And I don't know if that's part of a comment that needs to be made in this EIS, but it is a question for NYCHA, our political leaders, the lead agency for understanding this funding. Now, let me also say this before we go into questions and answers. Alihan and I started our work on this EIS, and we dived right in when we started, but we started last week. And so we have really dug into it, but we've dug into it for about 8 days. And so there may be questions that you all have that we will not be able to answer. And as Leila said, if you have questions that we are unable to answer, let us know, or we'll try to answer them now, but if we're not, we will try to answer them later and in writing. Leila?
Thank you so much, George, for a very comprehensive presentation. This DEIS is really a beast. It's over 1,000 pages long, with of course a lot of it in the fine prints, that is really where the at times the poison pills get hidden. So maybe what I would like to do is add a couple of points, specifically on this very fundamental question of, the type of program under which those units would be. As George mentioned, all of the alternatives, including the rehabilitation and infill alternative, would mean that all the units of public housing that are currently under Section 9 would be converted to Section 8, which is a privatization model where the properties are shifted to a private owner developer that ends up having a lease for 99 years, or at times it's a full acquisition. This question is actually at the core of a number of the conversations, and we certainly don't make any assumptions, and we don't take any position as to what should happen with these units. So I want that to be very, very clear. I also want to emphasize the fact that right now we are looking at a proposal that will have major impacts to the built environment. And with the influx of new people, it will have, a direct impact on noise and sewer and, the shadows that these buildings are going to cast, and so on and so forth. But this is not the ULURP process. We are still in a process that is dictated by HUD under the 1937 Housing Act, okay? And this is why it is actually HUD that is the agency of record. So it's a federal agency that is the agency of record. HUD has decided, and it happens very often, they have decided to subcontract in a way this process to NYCHA and HPD. And the reason for that is that NYCHA is not a city agency, okay? NYCHA is a public benefit corporation, and it falls under a fairly unrestrictive and vague set of rules and laws that are actually state laws. So the agency of record, the local agency of record, is HPD. All right. Sorry for being technical, and maybe folks are wondering why I'm saying that, but it is really important to frame the conversation correctly, and hopefully, because we're going to be dealing with this issue for quite a while. Once again, it is not a done deal. It's actually a good opportunity to get more cognizant on all these technicalities. So what we're going to do now is that we are going to start taking questions. Once again, these are the rules, and I really, really urge you to stick to the rules. You will have 30 seconds to ask a question. We will not take comments. If you start the sentence by saying your personal experience or how much you hate or love this project, I will very unfortunately, but very definitively mute you, and we will move to the next question. This is really an opportunity to have George and Alihan and myself, if I can, answer your questions. So I will ask you to actually use the raise hand function to indicate that you wish to ask a question. I will give you a couple of seconds. You can use the raise hand function. In the meantime, I see that there are questions that were typed in the Q&A function of the Zoom. So I'm going to read a couple. One of the questions is, what percentage of the new development will be eligible for low-income residents? So the answer to that is that the replacement buildings, there will be 6 buildings that will contain all the units that are currently contained in, spread out among 22 buildings, on the 2 campuses. So they will be all clumped into a total of 6 buildings, 3 for each campus. And these units will be under Section 8, which means that the tenants will continue to pay 30% of their income. Then the mixed income buildings will be a mix of market rate for 70% and affordable housing for 30%. The definition of affordable housing in this particular instance is for a blended AMI average median, no, area, I'm sorry, area median income of 80% blended, which means that you could have units that serve folks who are at 40% of the AMI. And at the other end of the range, you could have, units that serve a family that is at 120% of the AMI. Remember that in New York, the AMI is calculated based on the area median income of folks who live in New York City, in Nassau, in Westchester, and in Rockland, which means that you have very affluent areas that are included in the calculation. And therefore, the AMI in New York that is applied in New York everywhere equally. So there's no AMI for Chelsea and another one for an area in the Bronx and another area in Brooklyn. It's all the same. And it is based on a calculation of people who have high incomes because they live in parts of the state where the income is higher than the average of New York City. So once again, sorry for the long answer, but the short of it is that the mixed income buildings will only have 30% affordable housing. The DEIS tells us that they are projecting that the market rate units for a 1-bedroom will be $6,000. It is in the DEIS. All right. I see that we have lots of hands up. We're going to start with Holly K. Holly, you are permitted to speak. You can unmute yourself.
I'm unmuted.
Go
I'm
ahead.
actually an urban planner. I've
Go ahead
been
with your
doing.
question. Holly, go ahead with your question.
My question is there any consideration given to the fact that there may be a casino in Hudson Yards immediately to the north of the proposed development?
Thank you.
The
George.
answer is no. It is not considered. So when they do an EIS, they have in their no action scenario essentially background development that may happen. But as far as I'm aware, the casino is not part of that background development.
Thank you. The next question goes to Johan Moore. Johan, you're permitted to speak. You can unmute. And then the next speaker will be Roberta Gelb. Johan, go ahead.
Good evening. My question is about the possibility, if you could address the possibility of redistributing the FAR or the massing, if you will, on the site in order to achieve a least shadow and height impact, or would you say that as currently defined, it is essentially determined by the engineering needs? Thank you.
I think it's always a good idea to consider shadows when you're designing a building. Alihan's more of the designer than I am, but here's the problem with it is that the Chelsea Park at PS33's playground, they are directly to the north. And so they will be shattered even if the buildings aren't that tall. And uh, it's difficult with this program where you have this kind of density to actually materially, well, at least make a no impact scenario. I'm sure if Alihan spent some time to try to work the massing to lessen the shadow impacts on the parks, he could. But there's likely going to be some impact simply because of the proximity of that open space to this kind of density.
Thank you. The next question goes to Roberta Gell. Roberta, you're permitted to speak. And then it will be Leonard Smoke.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
So my question is, how do you mitigate the dust, the asbestos, everything that comes from the construction? Because I remember during 9/11, although we were on 16th Street, we got a lot of dust and who knows what else came up this way when the wind blew. So how much do you think this will affect not only the local area where this is happening, but the surrounding environment? And how many blocks do you think this effect will be in? I mean, and can that be mitigated? And how would you mitigate it? Is it possible with all the demolition of 22 buildings?
And George, actually, before you answer the question, I want to also put into context the fact that we are told in the schedule of demolition and construction that the tenants will actually remain on site, meaning that, you know, it will be a phased demolition and reconstruction. So the tenants are expected to live at ground zero for the entire time of this project. So, you know, just putting this into context that, you know, there will be, you know, folks living right there as this program goes through.
Yeah, you know, this is a completely reasonable concern, right? Because when you do demolition and construction, but really the demolition part of it, you can create, you know, can create dust and air quality concerns. Now, I reviewed the EIS, right, and they're not disclosing construction air quality related impacts, and they're not saying that there are going to be significant impacts. Largely because they plan on following the kind of typical, well, typical required, let's put it that way, required deconstruction methods that we use in New York City. So in New York City, you have to essentially deconstruct a building as opposed to demolish a building. You take it down floor by floor, in part because it minimizes the amount of dust, and then you also have dust capture. Now, listen, I would be the last person to say that it eliminates all the risk, because it doesn't. It doesn't eliminate all the risk, but it does lessen the amount of dust and problems with air quality that are created through the demolition. Now, of course, there'll be people living actually on the campus, as you know, in some buildings, while other buildings are coming down, and extra care needs to be taken. And you know, that is something that you can comment on in the EIS, and you should comment on, right? You know, what extra steps are going to be taken to make certain that tenants, neighbors aren't impacted by, you know, 16 years worth of construction and demolition, and you know, and ask for extra steps to be taken to make certain that those air quality isn't impacted.
Thank you. The next question goes to Leonard Smoke, followed by Olive Freud. Leonard, you're permitted to speak.
Okay, so I'm trying to figure out the alternative. I would love to see the present buildings redone, but from what we are told, they have to be demolished. There's no way to fix them. So if they are demolished, where do the people who are living in them now move to? And what is the way we remedy the situation? It's not so much, I mean, obviously we are against these buildings, but what is the alternative to replacing these buildings?
Yeah, so maybe I'm going to
Yeah.
take the first stab at your question, Leonard. I think it is really important to understand also the genesis of this project. In 2019, a working group was convened, and the working group recommendation was a set of recommendations, meaning that they were all to be taken together. It was not a pick and choose. And the two main recommendations were that these buildings should not be demolished because they did not need to be demolished, meaning that the condition of the buildings is actually pretty good. You know, those buildings are sturdy. They were very, very well built. The walls are very, very thick. And it's actually interesting because the DEIS had to evaluate one thing in the buildings that has been touted as being the reason for demolition, and it's mold. And there is no mold in the buildings. The only area where there's a trace of mold is in one cellar in building 1 in Elliott-Chelsea. And it's not even mold, it's like traces of humidity. So there is no mold in these buildings. The structure of the buildings is actually really good. There is no water infiltration. The roof at Fulton was redone, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago. And the roof at Elliott-Chelsea is in good condition. So what is problematic at these buildings is two things. The first one is, especially for Fulton, the heating is very temperamental. Why? Because they are on the municipal steam system. Steam is very temperamental, and steam deserves and requires a master plumber. And in winter, when the temperatures fluctuate, then your heat pipes become, very, very unhappy. A master plumber knows how to address that. And NYCHA has repeated over and over that they don't have a master plumber who is able to respond in a timely fashion. Buildings in New York City that are on steam include Grand Central Terminal and the Empire State Building. I can guarantee you've never heard of a steam pipe issue at Grand Central Terminal. Why? Because the MTA has a master plumber on staff 24/7. There's someone to cover the buildings 24/7. And that's what it takes. So maybe for NYCHA, it would not be 24/7. Maybe how about, 18, hours per day that your master plumber is on call. And not we don't know where he is. He's on vacation. Like I've heard that literally. So the other big issue is the elevators. The elevators can be replaced. And actually, given the size of the bank of elevators, you could even conceive that the elevators can be reconfigured to maybe be more practical. Those are the main issues with the building. So I think that, it is really important to reframe the narrative. We've been told, the conditions are really atrocious. The buildings are in bad condition. When we talk to residents, including, you have folks who are on this call, who are tenants, who have been tenants for a very long time. They will tell you that, the buildings are really in good shape. So they don't need to be demolished. So what happened after 2019, after this working group was convened? They made their recommendations. NYCHA really took it to heart, and they issued an RFP that called for full rehabilitation. There are actually 3 proposals that, if I manage, I will pull them up and I will share my screen. 3 very reputable developers responded to the RFP and submitted proposals, once again, for full rehabilitation. There was no demolition whatsoever. There were infill buildings. What's interesting is that in this particular proposal, the infill buildings are fairly modest, as George showed, especially for Fulton. It's, a very modest addition with no housing. And for Elliott-Chelsea, it is 1 building. The RFP proposals called for and showed many more units of housing. So we know that it can be proposed. Once again, I want to make it very clear that you can do infill buildings without a need to change the nature of housing in the existing buildings. It is being done currently by NYCHA in the East Village, where they are putting up an infill building and keeping all the housing, public housing tenants under Section 9. So, once again, I want to make sure that, people have clarity on that. And as I am saying that, I am not advocating for infill buildings either. Once again, I want to make that clear.
Yeah,
So,
I just want to say, I live in Penn South, and the cost of rehabilitating our own buildings is huge. And we had to borrow money, and we had to go on mortgages and everything else. And the asbestos problem was tremendous. So I was wondering, if HUD is willing to invest the money, or any other organization, sure, rehabilitate, redo the buildings. But we are told constantly that the cost of ripping them down and putting up new building is cheaper than rehabilitating the buildings. And you're telling us the opposite. So everything, that particular aspect has to be well documented and well told to the people around us, including our neighborhood.
yeah, so let me touch on that. This is a very, very important and core issue. We have this information, and according to NYCHA and the developer related, we have been told that the demolition, full demolition and reconstruction solely of the public housing units, only for the replacement building. Okay, so only for those 6 buildings. Leonard, I'm going to put you on mute because there's a lot of background. So solely for the replacement buildings, the cost of this project, you demo everything, you rebuild 6 buildings, it is $1.9 billion with a B. That number was shared with us in December, meaning that it was before Trump came into office and imposed 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum. It is likely today that, according to our calculations, if indeed, 25% increase on construction materials, the project would rise to over $2 billion. In order to refurbish, once again, it is according to NYCHA and related, it's their numbers, not mine. It would cost $1.1 billion. Okay, so it is much cheaper to rehabilitate the buildings than it is to reconstruct them. Furthermore, it would actually take less time to rehab. Approximately, and once again, it is according to NYCHA and the developer, it would take approximately 2 to 4 years to rehab, whereas reconstruction, you've seen it, it would take 16 years. So, all of this is well documented, and really a great opportunity tonight to share all this information. All right, moving on to Olive Freud. Olive, you are permitted to speak. Go ahead. Olive, you can unmute yourself.
Do you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Olive.
Right. Do you recognize that Manhattan is the densest borough in New York? Not just a little bit more dense, but very much more dense than the rest of the city. And it's incredible that in the densest city, you're putting in more density. If the whole point of this is to get a few more affordable housing, then just stick to the affordable housing, and it doesn't have to be in the very worst place that you could probably put it in. I know that's a philosophical question. I can't understand why people are doing things like this and who they're favoring, but I think we have to go back to basics. If we're talking about housing, what's best for the rest of the people that live here in the city? Thank you.
Thank you, Olive. George, I don't know if you want to chime in.
I think that comment stands on its own.
Yeah, thank you, Olive. The next question goes to Renee DeSantis. You are permitted to speak. You can unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
I had a question. I was wondering if there would be open space available for trees, benches, planters, and wondering, there was one depiction where I thought you could see that which was kind of behind the building wall, and just generally how much space, open space is being lost as a percentage under the plans. And then the second question is, what is the minimum distance between buildings that is required for light and air?
Right. Okay. So
Do we actually have some of the model that we can play with a little bit? Is it possible?
Alejandro, do you want to pop it up and show? I mean, we haven't calculated the percentage loss, right? The which we can do, but it's a big change, right? The amount of open space goes from a lot to very little. And Alejandro, I think you will share his screen. And just, I don't know, pick the one that you think tells the story
I can
best.
go to model, but just to answer the question at first, there are some draft designs of the open spaces in the DEIS documentation that you can see on my screen. So most of the open spaces, as described in the document, are configured within the buildings. So they're not like completely open, like they are like neighborhood parks in certain cases, which are in mid blocks, but they're also envisioning some of the building terraces to be private open spaces only for residents, and then in between buildings. But George and I didn't go through the shadows in very detail yet, so we're not really sure how much of these open spaces are taking like relatively good daylight. So some of them might be under the shade most of the day, but as a graphic, this is how they basically show between the two different campuses.
And
Right. So,
just to follow up to that, what about wind tunnels? Because it is a serious problem on the west side. It's a serious problem with the Hudson Yards proposal, where the wind tunnel has been studied and it is actually unmitigated. And I did not see anything about wind tunnel assessment for this plan.
wind tunnels are not normally a part of an environmental assessment. There is no chapter on wind in the technical manual. It has to be added in the scoping document if it's ever going to be studied, and I assume it wasn't because I didn't see a chapter in there on it. And so, yeah, it's unstudied. It is an issue in a lot of places. The other question that we had was minimum distance between buildings. Minimum distance between buildings is at least 40 feet, wall to wall. If you have legal windows, it depends on how high above the ground you are. Legal windows are windows that provide legal light and air to habitable rooms. And so what you see is, generally speaking, most of the buildings get their light either from windows that face the street or from these courtyards that you would see in the center of the blocks. And so those courtyards are, they need to be at least 30 feet by 40 feet for legal windows. I assume they are. However, in the rezoning alternatives, they do have the option of getting a special permit to waive out of those requirements, but you would need at least 40 feet distance between the buildings.
Great, thank you. Is it fair to assume that given the urban design, it is likely that this will create wind tunnels? Is it an assumption that can be made, just like looking at the design, or not really?
I can't answer that question. We haven't looked at it that way, and it's a good question that requires more investigation.
Got it. Okay, thank you so much. The next question goes to David Holoka. You're permitted to speak, David.
Yeah, thank you. George, you mentioned the importance of our city council member. It seems to me like the non-rezoning scheme here is sort of a non-starter. I think it just allows NYCHA to start building the first buildings of what will ultimately be the rezoning scheme without having to wait for ULURP. And NYCHA really only talks about the rezoning scheme. That seems to me the prize that they have their eyes on. And, you know, our city council member could theoretically block this project in ULURP. The city council has to weigh in. Other members tend to defer to the local member. If our city council member spoke up now and said, there's no way I would ever support something like this that has such a huge change to the character of the neighborhood and introduces such scale, could it block the certification of ULURP? Another way of asking the question is, would it have gotten this far without his tacit commitment, perhaps behind closed doors, to support it in ULURP?
Okay, so there's a lot I don't know about that question because but typically speaking, and I don't know the specifics of this one, this arrangement, but typically speaking, applicants don't complete an application and get into this process without at least the tacit agreement that the council member will at least consider it. And you know, the thing is that very often you'll get a situation where the council member will go, you know, they might be trying to negotiate something, right? And say, all right, well, you know, you could start, but you know, I'm going to need something from you. And there's very often something called where there's community benefits that come out of a rezoning that gets a council member approval. So, you know, this is a starting point. What Leila said, that this is not a done deal, and this is the proposal. This is the applicant's proposal, and it can be modified, especially if there's a rezoning involved, right? The rezoning that ends up mapping new districts or giving a special permit for waivers. And your council member and the Department of City Planning would be very important in determining what those modifications would be.
Great, thank you. I actually have a follow-up on that, George. The DEIS mentions that this project will seek a mayoral override. Can you speak to that?
So yeah, that caught my attention. All right, because there's this thing called a mayoral zoning override, which is something that was made. It exists in case law in New York State, and it's something that was not that common until the de Blasio era, and then de Blasio, they gave them out like candy, what happens is that if there's a public project that has usually it used to be reserved for public, explicitly public projects, but they've expanded it to other projects. You could have the mayor sign a piece of paper that says a project does not need to follow zoning. Now, it wasn't specific about what kind of mayoral zoning overrides it would request. It sounded like, from the language that they used, is that they would be asking for mayoral zoning overrides to waive temporary conditions that would largely be, I mean, which I speculated would be, as you are building out the campus and you're demolishing some buildings and you're building new ones, sometimes the buildings will be too close together and violate distance between buildings or no longer have enough space for legal light and air for windows. And so the mayor could sign a piece of paper to waive that requirement to maintain habitability in the buildings that are being demolished as they're building others if they're too close. That is the obvious reason for it, right? That is like, you know, when you're phasing a development like this, you're likely going to have that kind of condition. And the only way to really resolve it is through a mayoral zoning override. And that's what the language seemed to suggest. However, it was also kind of vague, right? They left it a little open-ended, and so they may ask for more.
So the one thing I will share on this is that the first time we heard of a zoning override is actually in a deposition that was made in the context of a court case. Okay, so a gentleman filed a lawsuit in 2022 against NYCHA, claiming that this project violated a number of rules, and the NYCHA, senior executive in charge of real estate portfolio, testified and was deposed, I guess, as part of this lawsuit. And in his deposition, back probably in 2022 or 2023, he admits that they will use a zoning override. The judge ended up dismissing the case with no cause, meaning that, just that it was not ripe. So it's not like, she made any determination on the merits of the lawsuit. But this is where we heard about the zoning override for the first time. And it was not mentioned in this context that it was, to alleviate a temporary condition. So we shall see, but, just thought it would be useful to put this on the record.
I will add one thing on that. Just NYCHA had tried to use mayoral zoning overrides on other infill, other projects. They tying two questions together. In like 2017 or 18, they tried to do a infill project on Holmes Towers on the Upper East Side. And there the council member would not support it, a rezoning. And so what they did was they tried to do a mayoral zoning override. And then the borough president sued them for not going through NYCHA and using a mayoral, not going through ULURP. And then instead of using using this mayoral zoning override, and they ended up withdrawing it entirely because they couldn't get the council member support for rezoning that would be required otherwise.
Interesting. All right, moving on. The next question goes to Lydia. You are permitted to speak. You can unmute.
Hi, George, Alihan, given your experience as urban planners, what do you think of the fact that this project segregates the NYCHA tenants into tall towers, a model that has been seriously discredited across the country for public housing? And that's my first question. My second question is, given the 16-year time frame for a construction project and what we all know about construction projects, what would your guess be as to how long this really takes? And doesn't that suggest that there is something fundamentally wrong with a project of this scale in a densely populated area?
Lydia, these are very good questions. And I'm not sure how well I can answer them. We can talk about what the proposal is. And really, they're questions for you and your neighbors and the residents to answer. Is this the best way for NYCHA residents to have their new apartments separated from the other units on the other types of units on campus? And it's not a question that I think that we can answer. And then regarding the construction timeframe, is that the time frame is absolutely not realistic because it starts in 2025 and it has for the rezoning, and we haven't even started that yet, right? I mean, clearly things have been pushed and they have not updated that timeline. And there are often delays in these schedules as they are proposed. I cannot speak whether that would happen here, but clearly they're going to be getting a later start than they have. But again, I think that's, you're asking good questions that I'm not sure that I'm able to answer.
But definitely, Lydia, make sure that you ask them tomorrow and Thursday directly to the NYCHA and HPD folks. And I also want to mention, why is it so important to go and testify? By law, as part of this process, they have to answer to every single question, even the silliest question that is totally not germane. They will respond. It's a silly question. It's not germane, but they have to respond to every single comment and every single question that we make. They're actually pretty good at dodging questions. But at the same time, if they dodge too much, then, if that were to ever make its way in front of a judge, a judge would say, you just dodged the question, you didn't do your job correctly. So it is really critical, A, to have a very, very robust turnout. People need to come. People need to understand that it is not a done deal, and NYCHA will try to make you believe that it is, but it is not. As George said, this is just a intro document, just telling us what they're planning to do, no more than that. And the third point really that I want to emphasize is that the condition of the buildings is not dire, and other funding mechanisms do exist, including, I want to flag for everybody's attention that in governance, when Brad Lander was the council member, he was actually able to negotiate the full rehabilitation of NYCHA units, staying under Section 9, no privatization, in the process of a broader rezoning. So, that there are ways to be creative. We're not, only, doomed to choose between, a privatization or full demolition. There are other alternatives that can be explored. They're not in this document, but that's by design, but it's not to say that they don't exist. All right, moving on to the next speaker, Joseph, you are permitted to speak. You can unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. Two questions. The first question is, what incentive does NYCHA have to tear down the neighborhood and rebuild? I guess that's really my question.
George, do you want to take this one?
Well, I mean, listen, you may be able to answer this. I can tell you what NYCHA says, right? I mean, NYCHA says that they have a portfolio of buildings that need a lot of work, and they don't have very much money because the federal government underfunds them. This is the story, and this is the story as long as I can remember has been this very same story. And by inviting developers in to the process, they are essentially getting more money. They're solving their problem by they no longer have the deficit of repairs if they get a new building. They're not going to have the backlog of repairs that they don't have money to pay for. And so I think they're in, you're asking, why are they doing this? They're doing this as at least as they say, they don't have enough money to fix their buildings that they have, and this is one way of getting a new building, and they don't have to pay for.
But if the buildings are rehabbed, wouldn't that solve just about all the issues?
Yeah, so I can take this one. So, back under the Obama administration, Sean Donovan at the time was the Secretary of HUD, and this public-private partnership was his brainchild. And basically, they wanted to do away with public housing nationwide. And they came up with this idea that they could leverage the private sector, because currently a site, a building, or a lot of space that is under public housing cannot be mortgaged. And so Sean Donovan said, well, why don't we pretend that it is private, and we give it to a private developer, and then we can mortgage the properties, and then with the mortgaged the funds that we get from the mortgage, we can do all the repairs, and then we repay the mortgage with and actually that was never really very clearly explained. It was like, well, hopefully with the rental that will be paid for these units, and God forbid anybody defaults, then the bank would take the building. But they never really answered this question. So they designed this model where basically under this particular conversion, if it were to go through, Related would receive what is considered market rate rental for each unit that they would create. And that is, they would receive the same amount, whether it is a new unit or an existing unit. Okay, so under Section 8, they don't care if, if it's new or rehabbed, you get the same amount. In this particular zip code, a one-bedroom apartment fair market rent is $4,048. So for each one-bedroom apartment, Related will receive $4,048 per month. Okay, so you do the math. If you want to average that, on average, there is a total of 1 bedrooms, throughout the campuses. It's actually not exactly true because you have large apartments. But, let's pretend for the sake of the calculation, 2,056 units at $4,048 per month. You multiply that by 12 and you get to a rental revenue for the entire campus that will go directly guaranteed in the coffers of Related is $115 million. That's the annual income that this project will produce to Related, guaranteed. And this is whether, once again, whether it is a new units or existing units. So for Related, it is, it's, the deal is amazing. They get rental guaranteed. It's money from the federal government. But as George mentioned, and I'm sorry for the background noise, my dog does not approve of this funding scheme. What George mentioned is that this current administration has announced that they're actually putting Section 8 into question. So it may be that the federal government is no longer guaranteeing this rental income to a private partner. So, the idea was, NYCHA was very eager to basically get rid of, as much as their portfolio as they could, going primarily for high land value in New York City. So this is why you saw a lot of those conversions, no demolition, but conversions nonetheless of existing buildings from Section 9 to Section 8, because, developers were just like, drooling over the opportunity to have, guaranteed rent paid and guaranteed by the federal government. Doesn't get better than that. So today, this is what Related has in mind. They're able to concentrate, those 22 buildings into 6. And then with the reclaimed land, which amounts approximately to 5 to 7 acres, then they would put, this mixed income, mostly market rate units that they could build at their leisure. It's not like they have to build everything all at once. There's actually no obligation to build all of the portfolio that you just saw. There's also something important to understand is that in the contract that ties Related to NYCHA, in their negotiated a master development agreement, it says that Related can walk away at any time in this process, and they're on the hook for $2.5 million. So I think that for this community, it is a serious consideration because, if they start the project in good faith, and then realize that, tariffs are such that, the construction cost is escalating, it no longer pencils out. They can, demolish buildings, dig a big hole, and then walk away. So this is really something that is, important to keep in mind and in perspective. And sorry for the very long answer, but hopefully it was useful.
No, thank you. One follow-up, if you don't mind.
Very quickly, go ahead.
So question, the difference between a rehab and totally new, the only entity that seems to benefit is Related? Question mark.
Mostly. And I'm going to tell you why I hesitate a tiny bit. In the master development agreement, it says that NYCHA will be a joint venture partner of Related. Okay, both for the replacement buildings, so the 6 buildings that will have all the, current public housing tenants that will be segregated, and NYCHA will also be a joint venture partner in the mixed income buildings. But Related gets to decide how the profits are determined. And therefore, Related entirely controls the spigot, and they could decide to pay themselves a very generous development fee, or a very generous management fee, or a very generous, we need a fund for capital repairs that may come up in the future, to the point that there would be no profits to share with NYCHA. But technically, NYCHA will be a joint venture partner. NYCHA will also be compensated for the value of the land on which the mixed income buildings will be built. They will not be compensated for the value of the land where the replacement buildings will be built, but only for the mixed income. So, and this is, I believe that this is the reason why NYCHA is so eager to push for the rezoning, because land valuation is based on density. The denser you can build, the more valuable the land is. So they want the land to be as valuable as possible. And they have admitted that at a public meeting of Committee Board 4. You can watch the replay of the Chelsea Land Use meeting of December of 2024. They admit all of that. And they also admit that, contrary to the recommendation of the working group, they will use the funds generated by the sale, which is not a sale because it's a 99-year lease for the land on which the mixed income buildings will be built. But NYCHA has said that they will use the funds whichever way they want, wherever they have to. It will not be earmarked to stay in Chelsea or used to help maintain the new buildings. They can use it anywhere they want. So for them, this is, a big impetus to actually go after top dollars, with the understanding, once again, that it is a one-off. It's not like they will revalue the value of the land 25 years into the lease. And we know that for a fact. We asked that question, are you going to have a halfway through revaluation of the land, which is fairly typical when you have a 99-year lease. But they're not doing that. They're just taking a lump sum, happy to put in their coffers, move on to do more repairs maybe elsewhere. And it seems if New York follows San Francisco, then eventually the goal is to actually entirely do away with public housing. San Francisco no longer has Section 9. They basically privatized the entire portfolio. So it looks like New York is trying to follow in those steps. All right, moving on to Victoria. You are permitted to speak. And you can unmute.
Hello. Hi, Leila. George, thank you so much for having me. A brilliant evening. I just wanted to remind everyone that Stephen Ross took an unbelievable amount of money from Harlem that he has failed to pay back. They are still waiting for their money. And of course, he never provided the affordable housing that he had promised at Hudson Yards. What my question was, and really thank you for a fabulous evening, what do you feel that Senator Kavanaugh, our assembly and senators can do in order to protect the residents?
Good and vast.
He is my senator.
So,
Senator Kavanaugh.
Yeah, so Senator Kavanaugh is the chair of the Senate Housing Committee. He can certainly encourage better funding for public housing. There was a time where funding from the city and from the state was earmarked for NYCHA. It is no longer the case. That was actually terminated, and this is actually a very significant point in history where the capital needs were no longer met. To give a little bit of a sense of scale, the capital needs for the entire portfolio is $78 billion. So it sounds absolutely astronomical, right? If you break it down, this is over 20 years. Once again, if you break it down with the cost of inflation, it amounts to $4 billion per year. New York City has a $110 billion budget, and New York State has a $216 billion budget. And as a mayoral candidate said at a public housing forum a couple of weeks ago, Michael Blake said, come on, don't tell me that we can't find $4 billion per year. So once again, this is what we can tell our state electeds. They can be creative in the next session. They can come up with a budget line item that, between, maybe a little bit more federal funding, some state funding and some city funding, we can probably reach this number. It seems reasonable. I also want to bring a little bit of scale to what NYCHA represents. If NYCHA was a city, it would be Atlanta. All right, once again, if NYCHA was a city, it would be Atlanta. That is how big NYCHA is and how many units of housing it provides in New York City. We cannot let NYCHA fail. All right, moving on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victoria, for the great question. To Joseph. You are permitted to speak. I see that we have a number of additional questions. We will really try to get to everybody, but I want to make sure that, at some point, George and Alihan will have to get to their lives. Joseph, you're permitted to speak.
Yeah, hi. One question. Does the panel feel that it's a conflict of interest what NYCHA is doing?
That's a good question. I think that this is definitely something that you may want to express in your testimony, because I know you will submit testimony, right?
Yes, ma'am.
It's actually a good point. It is really a good point. Moving on to Leonard Paletta. Leonard, you're permitted to speak.
My question is, I have two questions really. In terms of the mixed income profits from the mixed income buildings, do we have a figure on what that projects to be? And with respect to the compensation for the value of the land, are there any figures about either of those amounts?
No, the valuation has not yet been made, or at least not made publicly for sure. If I have to speculate, I would think that they're actively looking and trying to figure out who is going to do the valuation. This is incredibly sensitive, and both parties have to agree on who's going to be the land valuator. So we don't know that, but we have comps. We know how the cost of land in this area, and we know that it is the most expensive land in the city, and therefore in the world. So that sort of like settles the the matter. Then the question really becomes: are they doing valuation at the existing FAR? The proposed with rezoning, are they including the mayoral override, thinking that they'll get through? So this is where they probably are, but we do not know. A number has not been shared. What we know, which I find pretty troubling, is that there will not be any revaluation of the land, meaning that NYCHA gets what they get today in 2024-5 or 2026 if they manage to get this through, and that's it. They don't, the land is likely going to continue to increase in value, and NYCHA does not capture that value in the course of the next 99 years.
So,
You're not.
so, so does that mean then that Related will basically just have a windfall from the mixed income rents that they collect?
Correct. And they can, and once again, they entirely control this spigot. So if the market is no longer conducive to building anything, they will not build anything. If they want to build condos, they can build condos. If they, there's no limitation on what they could or could not choose to do, which is also, it's like they could, put a hole in the ground and let it sit there, make it a nuisance until they extract more public benefits. This is a big page out of Steve Roth of Vornado playbook. That's, what he loves to do. So, you could imagine all sorts of scenarios on what could happen.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you so much, Len. The next question goes to Joseph. Joseph, you are permitted to speak. And I'm sorry, I don't have my glasses, but it's Joseph with a last name that starts with a D.
Yes, thank you. I just had a two-part question. Is anything given consideration to the fact that, at least at the Fulton houses, the resident board voted in favor of the reconstruction of the demo and building of the new buildings? And I know it goes against everything where, this is basically taking into account what the neighborhood and the people who live in the area, the effect it'll have on them. But given the fact that the tenants want this, is that being taken into consideration?
Yeah, thank you. So I think that this is another big misconception. So what happened so I explained in 2019, working group, then they issue the RFP. The RFP says no demolition. And this is, the RFP, the recommendation of the working group come after like a year plus of negotiations with the tenants, and the tenants are very clear, no demolition. The RFP comes out, 3 bids, no demolition. Related wins the bid, and then in 2022, they start to shift. Related starts to shift, and what happens is that in early 2023, Related administers a survey. So it is not a vote. It is a survey that basically they create a QR code and they go door to door. By then, Related has hired an community outreach consultant named HOU. And HOU goes door to door and they tell people, well, wouldn't it be great? You would have new apartments. Wouldn't you like to have new apartments? And everybody's like, but we're getting new apartments, right? And they're like, yeah, would you like new apartments? So the survey questions read, would you like new construction with rezoning? Would you like new construction without rezoning? Or would you like your apartment refurbished? And people got totally confused, thinking that the reconstruction, like new construction, meant my apartment is getting a gut renovation. They did not understand. Nowhere in the survey does it say demolition. The number of people who participated in the survey is 510. Okay, 510 people. And there is, according to NYCHA, I believe, over 5,000 people. So only 10% of folks engaged in the survey process. And they had to lump option 1A and 1B to come to a majority. So once they lumped that, then they announced it as the tenants have voted and they support demolition. What happened since then is that the tenants understood that the question was totally misleading. A group of tenants have done very, very good work of organizing, and they actually circulated a petition. And their petition shows that there is 959 tenants who are opposed to demolition. So the tenants are not in favor of demolition. This is the narrative that is being driven by NYCHA and related, that has been picked up by the press, unfortunately. But very clearly, this question has not been, determined by an actual vote. All right, I think we have time for, well, it looks like we went through all the hands going up. All right, it is 8:18. We had a really robust discussion. Thank you so much. Thank you, George, and thank you, Alihan, for all your insight and all your help. And thank you for providing the facts. As we can tell, there is, a lot of misconceptions about this project. It is a very big and impactful project. There has been a lot of fear mongering about, it's a done deal. We can't change anything. We have to take it as it is. We're starting to see that it is, a little bit more nuanced. It is not a done deal. There's a lot of, steps that need to go through before anything gets approved and this community can continue to organize. George and Alihan, do you want to take a, parting words before
The last thing I just want to amplify what you just said is that we have a process in New York City right now as part of the environmental review, but then later as part of if there's a rezoning, where the public can get involved and make your voice heard. And if you have opinions, you should speak up, you should speak clearly, and you should speak loudly and politely about what you'd like to see, because ultimately, democracy still matters in this city, and the thing is that you need to have a loud enough voice to be heard. And ultimately, you all, if you have strong opinions about this, can make your voice heard, and you can affect this process.
Yeah, thank you so much. So perfect segue to remind everybody that tomorrow, Wednesday, starting at 6 p.m. at Fulton Community Center, there will be a public hearing on that very matter. If you have objections, if you feel that the draft EIS does not comprehensively address all your questions, or if you object to parts of it, buildings are too tall, the shadows are unmitigated, the noise is unacceptable, the traffic level is unacceptable, please attend and speak up. This is really important. Once again, Wednesday, tomorrow, 6 p.m. at the Fulton Community Center, 119 9th Avenue, which is between 17 and 18. Please show up. It is really important. If you can't make it tomorrow, come on Thursday. It will be exactly the same format, but it will be at Elliott-Chelsea at Hudson Guild, 441 West 26th Street. It starts at 6:30. Come and speak up. This is really important. I thank you very much for your participation and attendance. The recording of this webinar will be available. I will send emails. I will disseminate it to all your neighbors. Please share it with the broader community. Let's all, stay informed, and let's continue to participate. Thank you so much, and I wish you all a very good evening.